Thank you so much for joining us for our second session of our Ready for Recovery series. We are really excited to have everyone here today. My name is Alexis Squire, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Deputy Director of Partnerships and Engagement for Serve DC. We are really excited to have this 90 minutes with you, and we don't take it lightly that you are choosing to spend your time with us. We know that there are so many other competing priorities in this day and time, and so we are really appreciative that you thought of us today and the conversations that we would share with you today. So without further ado, we will get started. Excited to talk about matching and maximizing the professional skills of volunteers. A really interesting and really diverse and rich conversation that we're going to bring to you. Last week, we were really fortunate to have a great conversation centered around mobilizing volunteers and community-led efforts in this climate of the crises that we've been experiencing. And we heard from some really great thought leaders in that space, and we had a really successful turnout. So today we are looking to raise the bar and really have the conversations that will be a value add as we navigate this sensitive and critical time together. So without further ado, we will get started. We will start with a few housekeeping tips to ensure that we are all having the best experience here together. For our accessibility and for everyone's accessibility, we have a live closed captioning available during our session. To view the closed captioning, please toggle to the full screen closed caption link provided at the top of the chat. Also, please don't forget to remain on mute to avoid any background noise that may cause any distractions. And we are excited to have this be a two-way conversation. So there are areas that we've designed for question and answer. So please use that group chat as a parking lot to ask any questions that you have as we continue with our session. For optimal viewing, please use the toggle at the upper right hand and change it to your gallery view so that you can see everyone who's a part of today's session. And finally, please do not forget to fill out our survey after you participate today. We really appreciate your and value your feedback, and would love to hear more about what is of interest to you and what you've learned and would like to learn more about today's session topic. All right, we'll get into our agenda. We have 90 minutes today, a power-packed agenda, and it is our hope that you will walk away with new tools and resources to help you serve DC. We want to talk about the first is that we'll have a front row view of a one-on-one discussion with our very own Director Scales and the President and CEO of United Ways United Capital, Rosie Allen Herring. Followed by that discussion, we will have a moderated discussion by Ms. Kim Ford from Martha's Table, CEO of Martha's Table, and some passionate and skilled community leaders, advocates, and change makers around our region. It will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A from the audience. And next you will hear from me again, and I will provide you some exciting information and upcoming events that Serve DC will have for you in the future. Finally, we will have closing remarks by our director again, and we look forward to seeing you again on our next two sessions that are happening both on the 15th of September and the 29th of September. Okay, so let's talk about today just a little bit more. We've been, again, in this really sensitive time. To not acknowledge the climate that we're in would just be not appropriate for us and not realistic. We've been going through a lot. And so we really designed these sessions and this series to really speak to everything that we're going through and to best position us as a collective community to recover from it all. And so today, when we talk about volunteers, we would encourage you to really have an open mind and think about how you traditionally think about volunteers and what are the possibilities for volunteers moving forward within your organizations. So we're going to specifically talk about how to maximize volunteers. We're going to talk about leveraging volunteers and partnerships with skilled professionals with professional skills. We're also going to talk about how to strategize and activate skilled-based volunteers. And last but not least, we're going to talk about the organizational structures needed to effectively manage and evaluate volunteer activities and really ensure that your volunteers are getting what they want and need out of these opportunities. Our one-on-one discussion, I think we are in for a treat today. As I mentioned, we have our Chief Service Officer and also Miss Rosie Allen Herring from United Way. Both of them come with a wealth of knowledge. They are both servant leaders. They are both experts in the the public-private partnership space, and both just really intentional around leveraging volunteers and leveraging all that we have to really best position our city to be the best. And so without further ado, they're going to talk about how we can look at what we have ahead of us, how we can recover with equity, with resilience, and with vibrancy. And so I will turn it over to our Chief Service Officer, Ms. Eris T. Scales.
Good morning. How's everyone doing? Oh my goodness, it's wonderful to join you, even if it's virtually. And I want to thank you. There you are, Rosie. You're already on. So I want to invite Rosie to come on screen with me. I'm so excited to be here with you. How are you?
I am well, and it's really a privilege and pleasure for me to be with you today.
Yes. So we have about 20 minutes, 25 minutes together to really talk about a lot of things. So we're going to be like rapid fire. People want to hear from you. They want to understand how they can leverage these amazing skills that they already have to serve our community and step up in new and exciting ways. So I just want to highlight for folks who are joining us today, kind of what my goals are, my objectives for this conversation. So one, I want to make sure that we are really reconsidering the impact and opportunities of volunteers. We know that we cannot build back our community. We cannot be better without having a collective and collaborative approach. And people need to understand that volunteering is not simply serving the homeless or passing out food, but there's a lot of other ways to give back, right? So that's one. The second thing that I would love for us to be able to cover in this conversation is I want to make sure that we are inspiring people to act and to act upon their purpose. I loved in our pre-conversation how you stated that service and serving is your purpose. And so with that, how do we activate that in others and have them really tap into what they're passionate about? And then finally, I want to make sure that during our one-on-one, we can talk about how we advance good deeds, but that we're doing it with intentionality and that we're doing it well. And so we know that we're in a city where there's more nonprofits than anywhere else in the country. You can find no shortage of people who want to serve and do well, from the political sector to volunteering to the nonprofit sector. But you got to come to it with a real pure heart, I think. And I think there has to be some passion and some commitment to that. So those are our objectives. Does that sound fair?
It sounds more than fair.
All right, good stuff. So with that, let's just start with your whole philosophy around service. You know, I could go into who you are and read a whole rat stat, but everybody can Google you, right? They can Google you. But let's talk about what it means for service to be of purpose to you.
Sure. And thank you, Director Scales, as well as to everyone who's chosen to give their time today by being on this session. Because of you, we know that collectively as a community, we will be well. And so when we think about, leadership and we think about being of service, It's really just about being a human being. Director Scales, one of the things that we recognize and that I have come to understand in my years is that everyone can do something. We sometimes tend to think that the piece that I can do, if it's not something grandiose, monumental, something that gets all of the glory, something that is very, very public, that perhaps my small contribution doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you that that contribution matters more than something someone does much more publicly. And so I encourage you, as you're thinking about what you can do, service is really just the thought that everyone brings something to the table, everyone can do something to support the community, and that collectively we cover the community.
Absolutely. And let's go a little deeper with that with regards to something that everyone can do. Again, so we're really trying to tap into and highlight skills-based volunteerism. And some people may be familiar with that, some may not. And what I love about skills-based volunteering is that, again, we do, each and every single one of us have a trait, we have a skill, we have something that we can bring to the table that could mostly be behind the scenes or more professional kind of skills that we're bringing. So what are some of the skills that you see organizations needing right now, particularly with COVID, as it relates to skills-based and having people think about what they bring to the table from that perspective?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think we hear so much about is, people think of volunteerism or being of service as what I call the hammer and nails experience, meaning that you have to use your hands in order to feel like you've been of service. And the skills-based volunteerism says that you're using your brain and you're using your heart. And those are just as important as using your hands. And so while we're in this COVID environment, where it's really not necessarily practical that everyone is going to have the opportunity to go out and have a hammer and nails experience just for exposure's sake, there is still something you can do. So when you think about the skill sets that you may have that you probably didn't think about it in a volunteerism way, because usually skills-based is how you earn your living. And you don't think about it in terms of, I could actually be giving this away, because you're thinking about your next promotion or how you can advance that skill set in the workplace. So when you think about being an accountant, you think about being a lawyer, you think about being, a person with a specific skill set that you use in your day-to-day life. But in a nonprofit community or a community that's doing work to serve those who need us, you can still bring those same skill sets to bear. So you can help a nonprofit as an accountant do their 990 tax return. That's a significant cost to them that they don't have to expend if you give it. When we think about skills-based volunteerism, the term that most likely comes to mind is pro bono. And we generally think about it in terms of the legal, career. But there is so much else that can be done pro bono, volunteerism, skills-based, that allows you to bring that financial acumen, bring that technology acumen. Most technologists don't realize that they can use those skill sets to help websites, to help nonprofits do their work. Again, that's stuff that can still be happening even while we're in this COVID environment. So don't let the current environment restrict you or limit you, just like we don't want your mind to limit you in what you think volunteerism is and how you can be of service.
I love that. Pro bono. Absolutely. The other thing that comes to mind for me is really around using those skills to serve on boards of directors. And so just like corporations, right, our nonprofits have boards. Everyone knows that. And I think we often talk about wanting to hold businesses and corporations accountable for having diverse representation on their board. And I think the same holds very true for our nonprofit leaders. We see very often, and this is not poking at anyone, but we do see a lot of boards that may not necessarily be representative of some of the communities and populations that organizations are serving. So what are some things that we can start to consider, or how do we start to take advantage of this time now to increase the pipeline, to start bringing more diverse representation to our boards, because they're guiding the strategic direction, they're providing a lot of the oversight. We want to make sure that we have people at the table too who are connected and understand what's happening at the hyper local level.
Absolutely. I mean, board service is just yet another way to serve. But
Mhm.
board service is not always reserved for people who think that they are an expert in a particular area. And in the nonprofit sector, even just like in the corporate sector, it's about bringing a set of skills that help the organization advance its work in whatever it is that it's choosing to do. I don't know if there's, I can hear a little bit of background, but I hope that it's not coming across to you. But being on boards, and it is critical that boards are diverse, and it's not just in the corporate setting, because I think it's even more critical in the nonprofit sector. Because generally in the nonprofit sector, there is a service
Hello,
to a
Ms.
particular
Herring.
segment of our population.
Ms. Herring, I apologize to interrupt you, ma'am. I hear we have an issue on our audio side. Give me just one moment. I want everyone to hear you clearly. So give me one moment to adjust that, please.
Technology, the pivot.
We're all multitasking and we're trying to still get it in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've gone ahead and addressed that issue, ma'am. I'm so sorry. If you could proceed, please.
Quite all right, quite all right. So, Director Scales, we were talking about having diversity on various boards and how it's
Yes.
similar to the corporate, board as well. And that level of accountability that we hear so much about in today's setting, it's the same in the nonprofit sector. But I would venture to say, as someone who serves on both public boards as well as nonprofit boards, I think the nonprofit board is even more critical because it generally, surrounds itself around a particular issue that is of concern to the community or a particular segment of society. For me, my personal passion are women and girls. And so if I'm
Mm-hmm.
serving on a board for women and girls, be it Girl Scouts of the National Capital Area or the Washington Area Women's Foundation, that's not work to me. That's a part of who
Yeah.
I am and that's a part of my passion. So if you think about the diversity on boards, it's a governance issue that we don't typically think about in terms of nonprofit because we think that it's all about the bleeding hearts who want to give away the store, who want to
Right.
simply do work. But there's a way
Yep.
to do that with excellence as well. So I think that it's a matter of looking at boards as another way to raise your level of contribution to an organization that allows that organization to survive, thrive, and impact those that it's a part of its intent.
I love it. And with that, we're clearly in a state right now where there's a lot of socio-political, socio-economic, just a lot of unrest. And I think that unrest is sparking people. I don't know what is going on today with our audio. We're having
Yeah.
a cross.
Okay. We're having what's called a cross internet connection. Madam, just give us 1 second. It's really not in our control, but we're trying to rectify it. So give me just one moment, please. I'm so sorry.
Okay. See, these are like the kind of skills that people can bring to the table
Absolutely, absolutely.
to support these types
Director
of
Scales, you still
productions.
will be great today. It will be great.
Oh, we are great. Listen, let me tell you something. I'm tell everybody something. There's so much that I have learned to come to just release and woosai in this period of COVID. There are so many things that are beyond our control. And I think for many of us who are leaders, we want everything to be perfect. We're type A. And sometimes things just happen. Like you get a cross internet connection, something I've never even heard of, that just sabotages all of your audio. But
It's quite all
Okay,
right.
ladies, I apologize once again. I think that we have stymied the issue for now. So again, let's proceed.
thank you,
No
Bridget.
worries.
This is a 2 of 4. We've been doing many of these, and hey, they just want to try to interfere with what we got to say today, Rosie, but we will not let them. We will not let them.
No, there's a message to be given, and we will give it.
That's right. That is right. And so I was saying with that, right? And so people get inspired. They want to serve. They're seeing a lot of this narrative that's coming out from the media. We have more heightened awareness around a lot of social injustices, etc. And so I think it causes people to want to step up, like it's in the moment, right? But what we know is in serving, it needs to be a long-term game, right? We need people to be committed, to be connected, not just for the moment, but beyond. So what has inspired you? What has kept you going?
Oh, wow.
And what words of advice would you give to people who may say, you know what, today I want to go out and I want to work with Martha's Table, but 5 months from now, when they don't have the bleeding heart, they fall back. You know, how do we stay engaged? What keeps you going?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. One, you have to simply know your purpose. And for many people, they go through an entire lifetime not understanding why they're on this earth. And for me, at this point in my life, I think I came to understand it pretty early. I'm an old soul because I had older parents and I had older brothers and sisters. So for me, people has never been a challenge for me. I'm the youngest of 10, so I knew 9 different personalities with my siblings, as well as both my parents. So I'm pretty clear about my purpose. But it's also a matter of, as you go through life, it's a journey. Life is a journey. And so as you go through that journey, you may be exposed to different things, but at some point in time, you have to really get to what speaks to who you are and why it matters. And I came to understand early on that women and girls were my personal passion. I'm mother of 2 daughters. You know, my husband's the only man in the house. But at the end of the day, you know, girls have ruled my family. It's 6 girls, 4 boys. There's 17 grandchildren, only 4 boys. So that tells you women rule my family. But it's also a matter of when you see something that sparks you, something that ticks your heart, that says this is wrong or I need to make it better, and I have an opportunity to do so. That's when you know you found your passion. It won't come out to you like some big vision and say, your passion is like a fortune cookie. It's going to come in the way that it keeps revealing itself over and over again. When you keep seeing yourself in certain places, when you keep running into similar people, when you keep getting asked to do certain things, that's the universe giving you your passion. You just have to be open enough to hear it and see it. So as I think about where we are now in terms of COVID, yes, it's a troubling time, and everyone has been impacted. The thing about COVID, I say to everyone, is there's not a segment of our population that hasn't been touched by COVID. You don't have to have had it. It doesn't have to necessarily been someone in your family, but every walk of life has been touched by it, which means that we all have COVID as a responsibility in some shape, form, or fashion, that we can do something about it. So finding your passion and determining that you're going to serve simply just comes with going through your journey in life.
I love the part where you said, you know, you got to be able to receive it, right? And one of the things, and I tell people this all the time, I feel guilty sometimes talking about how great I feel right now in this moment, because it has allowed me to slow down, fall back, and really be able to receive in a different way than before. And so I just think really being able to be in tune with what the universe is sending to you and not being afraid to embrace and embark upon that is utterly important. And then that's where you do find that you want to lean in, where you want to lean in, and you start to think about the skills that you do have that you want to offer to others. So that's a really great point. And before we get ready to close, I do want to ask one kind of last question, because these are heavy times. And so we have people balancing careers, they're balancing their home, they're balancing all of this narrative that's coming in from the media and other sources. And now we're saying, hey, you know how to, you know, you're an accountant, you're good with finances, please find an organization to support. We're saying, hey, you have amazing technology skills, help produce a Ready for Recovery series, so many different things. And there becomes the balance, right? How do you, as a leader, particularly of a complex organization like United Way, you know, as the newly elected director of the Eastern region for Delta Sigma Theta, as a board member of so many different organizations, find that balance? And then how do we make sure that people are still bringing those skills to the table, like they're not feeling overwhelmed in the moment? You know, what are some self-care, some takeaways?
Well, there are a couple of things. I will tell you, 2020, if it hasn't taught us anything, it's taught me the value of self-care
Yeah.
because it stops you. This year has stopped everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And what it's done for me is said, this is a time of reflection. And so while I've been fortunate enough to work with a great group of professionals who have chosen to give their time and their talents to United Way, they allow me to do what I do. I don't do anything alone. And you mentioned my good sorority sisters of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. They allow me to do what I do because we collectively do it together. And in
Mm.
every organization that I've been privileged to serve in, with, and for, it's really been about how we move the organization to the next level. And it's about people seeing things in you. So at the end of the day, it starts with a debt of gratitude. I wake up every morning at 4 a.m. and from 4
Yeah.
to, I know it's crazy. Some
No,
people
me
probably
too.
tuning in.
4:30.
And
4:30. I don't know who I am anymore. I'm like, I'm up at 4:30 in the morning.
there's a trick to how I ended up being at 4 a.m. I'm a Southern girl, but and I'm usually up early anyway. But 4 a.m. to 5 is my time because I recognize that I have chosen to accept some of these responsibilities. I have an obligation
Right.
to do that. You can't burn out when you ask for something. You have to then
Mm.
ask, how can I do it? And who do I need with me to help me do it the best way that I can?
I love
And
that.
then when you do feel that sense of overwhelming, because it is normal, it's natural, we're human. I don't always get it right. At the end of the day, there's sometimes I really get it wrong, but you have to be open to that corrective teaching and open to that feedback. And as long as you remain teachable, either by the universe telling you to sit down or someone giving you some constructive, feedback, then you will always again pick back up and get on your journey. So for 2020 to be a year of self-care, a
Mm-hmm.
year of stopping what you thought you were going to do, a stark reminder that you can't always plan everything because I am a type with a list. Got a list right now. But at the end of the day, I have learned that whatever you think you're going through, whatever sense of overwhelmingness that you may have, when you look out, and I see it every day at your United Way, and you see the families that are really and truly traumatized by what's going on. For the bulk of us, we've been merely inconvenienced.
Right.
Others have been totally upended. When you think about that, when you see that, you can't unsee that, then you know that then this too shall pass. And
That's
so
right.
I sort of kind of just, ask people to go and think and go within, recognize that this is something that's very real. You're not in it alone because it has literally left no one untouched. But at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, 2021 is coming and we have to be ready for it when it comes. So that means the
Yes.
only way we're going to get ready for 2021 while we're wishing 2020 away is to get through 2020. And we
Yeah.
will, but we will do it together.
Fantastic. So with that, I want to thank you for your time. I also want to be respectful for the rest of the program. We were going to do a Q&A, and I see a few questions, but I want to have us remain on track. And so we will not do Q&A at this moment, but we will do some responses in the chat. Folks want to know about how to keep volunteers to remain engaged and excited during these times. If there's anything that United Way has done by way of pivoting that other organizations could take advantage of. So we'll drop some things into the chat for you guys. But with that, I want to say thank you so much. This was a really great exchange. And I turn it back over to our Deputy Director, Miss Alexis Squire.
Yes, so
And
that was
just very quickly, just to let them know if there are questions that perhaps we didn't get a chance to answer, if they share them with your offices, I promise to make certain that I get back to you. And they can always go to our United Way website as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rosie.
My pleasure.
great. Thank you, ladies. That was amazing. We learned, I'm just going to do a quick recap in the absence of questions, but I heard gratitude, purpose, balance, reflection, self-care, and perspective. So I think those were really the key takeaways, and that was really valuable conversation. We are going to transition. As Eris mentioned, we will get to some of those questions, and we will address a lot of that with our next portion of our session, which is our panel discussion. We are grateful to have another servant leader within our community, and someone who is native to the Washington, D.C. area proper, Miss Kim Ford. She is the president and CEO of Martha's Table. She's the former deputy assistant secretary and acting assistant secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. She's a community champion, as I mentioned, and she leads with boldness and grit and tenacity. And I think we will have a very engaging conversation and learn more about this great topic. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Kim.
Oh my goodness, ladies with boldness, and oh my gosh, Deputy Director Esquire, you're killing me. Native Washingtonian is good enough for me. I want to thank you for that amazing introduction and for all the work that you do. Certainly want to thank Director Scales for everything that she does, and Rosie Allen Herring. Oh my goodness, it's just not fair to have to follow you. And since you shouted out your sorors, let me make sure to say hello to the sorors of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Now, I also want to thank Serve DC. Oh my goodness, you guys have been so amazing to us at Martha's Table, the great Martha's Table. We are 40 years old and 40 years strong. And Serve DC has really supported us during this incredible time, and just want to thank you for that. And thank you for including me and us in this conversation. I'm really excited that we're talking about volunteers today. Here at Martha's Table, we rely on our volunteers in all capacities to accomplish our mission. I mean, we couldn't do it without volunteers. And you know, the role of a volunteer in any organization goes beyond the physical or skilled tasks they participate in. Their dedication to the mission and passion positions them to be great champions for the organization. And they provide direct service and serve as the ultimate advocate for an organization's mission. Part of why we're here today is because we are in the midst of like multiple pandemics and injustices. So COVID landed on us, right? And that has drastically increased the need in communities for supports that organizations like Martha's Table and others have to respond to, and that requires far more volunteers. We are also in the middle of massive unemployment, and that can create hopelessness in communities, but strangely also creates an opportunity to tap into potential volunteer bases that maybe weren't in the mindset at the time. I can tell you, so many people have come to Martha's Table after they've lost their jobs or had their hours cut, and then they volunteer in turn to support us. And then, of course, the racial injustice and social unrest that's happening, which causes us to look around and ask questions like, does my board, who are volunteers, by the way, as Director Scales mentioned earlier, does my board best represent who and how we stand alongside the communities that we serve? And of course, I love my board at Martha's Table. So with all that's going on, I can tell you firsthand that treating somebody with dignity and respect and compassion and grace, who is having to figure out how to survive right now, is an essential step in the road to recovery. And doing so doesn't just happen on the front lines. It's in sharing your talents to build equitable systems, to redesign approach, and to provide access to much needed funding. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how we maximize the value of our volunteers, how we leverage partnerships with skilled volunteers, how we build organizational structures for effective volunteer engagement, and strategize and activate skills-based volunteers. With that, put a little boom pow in it. We have an awesome panel that's coming up. Let me introduce everybody. We have Danielle Holly, CEO of Common Impact, an organization that brings companies and social change organizations together to create meaningful change through skilled volunteerism. Danielle brings an important national lens to our conversation about pro bono, another term we're going to roll with it today, pro bono volunteer engagement and corporate social responsibility. Danielle, thank you for being here. Catherine Dixon, she's the president and CEO of Rebuilding Together, which supports low-income residents of DC and Alexandria with critical home repairs and other housing challenges. As that, she'll share her perspectives of how to build meaningful experiences that benefit both volunteers and her organization. And Ken Keto. Following a career as a finance executive, Ken Keto retired to focus on angel investments, advising startups, and pro bono nonprofit support. He brings an essential perspective as a skilled volunteer as a board member of Compass Pro Bono, which places pro bono consulting teams of professionals to support nonprofits through management challenges. And as a mentor for SCORE DC, he counsels small businesses to their next phase of growth. Welcome. Let's rock and roll. I'm so excited to be here. And let's kick it off with the first question. Tell us how COVID has impacted your organization's capacity and highlight how skilled and frontline volunteers have helped fill essential human capital needs during this time. I'm going to open that up to everybody.
I'm happy to kick it off. Hi, everyone. And thank you to Serve DC and Kim for your amazing energy this morning and moderating. And now, I love it. We should all just do it. Brings it up a notch. So, you know, I run an organization called Common Impact that builds skilled volunteer programs, connecting largely companies and nonprofits together. And one of the things that we have observed in COVID is that it has impacted every nonprofit, but it has impacted nonprofits very differently. And there are three different categories. Sea Change Capital, which is an organization that studies nonprofits, have presented us with responders, hibernators, and hybrids. And responders are the food banks, the shelters, the domestic violence organizations that have seen an incredible rise in demand for their services, while they've seen a real drop in hands-on volunteers, in resources to deliver those services. Hibernators like educational and arts organizations that have just had to shut their doors. And then hybrids are organizations that have had to pivot their models and stay open, but not in the same capacity. And so Common Impact itself is very much a hybrid organization, and we have pivoted our in-person pro bono volunteer models to a virtual environment, and that has moved pretty seamlessly. But one of the things that has really impacted us and the organizations that we serve is that, you know, the ways in which skilled volunteers can help right now is so different, and there is no theme in terms of what organizations, organization by organization need or individual by individual can give. But in general, those responders need real operational support, right? Like food banks need individuals who can think about how to calibrate demand and scale up and down operations and to support and get food into the mouths of hungry people as quickly as possible when you can't anticipate your resources or the demand. And those hibernators, those organizations that have had to shut their doors completely, need scenario planning. They need to think about how and where and when can we open up, and how should we think about engaging our team and our board through this pause period, and or do we have to think about consolidation and merging and shared space and services. And then hybrids, it's really about program design, right? Like, how do we think about moving programs into a virtual environment and engaging people in a virtual capacity? Well, what we've seen is that there's a significant increase in intent to give and to serve in this time, and it's really just about activating people.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I want to make sure all three folks actually jump in on this.
Hi, I'm happy to jump in. Good morning, everyone. As Kim said, we are Compass Pro Bono, and what we do is we connect skilled volunteers to local nonprofits, and we have an office here in DC, one in Philly and one in Chicago. And we have two types of programs. We have what we call micro projects, which are 5 months. We have longer projects that are 9 months, and this is for the nonprofits, everything from board engagement, board development, marketing, fundraising, strategic planning, and we do about 50 projects a year. and we have about 300 to 350 volunteers per year here in the DC area. So as COVID hit, we were right in the startup of our small projects, our micro projects, which kicked off in February. So we had to, much like Danielle, we had to go to virtual consulting starting in mid-March, and clearly had originally scoped out our work with these nonprofits to address a certain need they had and tried to stay true to those projects. But at the same time, each of the nonprofits had a new reality, and so we tried to flex a bit as well. Happy to say that we completed all the projects. The nonprofits were very pleased with what we had done. The volunteers all hung in there with us and remained engaged. And amidst all this, we also discovered and found that there were a lot of other unmet needs from the nonprofits. So we launched something called on-demand projects, which were essentially 2 to 6 week sprints, completely virtual as well, where we were able to find out what the nonprofits needed, whether that was just thought partnership for the EDs, they needed help with a digital strategy because now they were trying to deliver more things digitally. They had new fundraising needs because big events got canceled. They just needed help financially modeling what was going to be their future. And so we were able to match 40 nonprofits with skilled resources. And I think as Kim or Rose had said, we found that there were furloughed employees that were really primed to give back to the community and felt like they were able to give back to nonprofits at a time when those nonprofits needed it. So that's what we did at Compass.
And everyone, good morning. This is Catherine Dixon with Rebuilding Together. And Rosie mentioned earlier that volunteers so readily associate volunteering with hammers and nails. And quite frankly, we use, I don't know, 1,200, 1,500 volunteers a year to help provide the free home repairs that we give to our low-income clients. So we have had to pivot, like most organizations, from the direct service model to relying more on some brain power of volunteers and, frankly, some vehicular power to help deliver safe and healthy home kits for our clients and to make check-in phone calls. So COVID has certainly thrown us a wrench.
Well, I got to tell you, I think COVID's thrown everyone a wrench. And I don't think that anybody actually anticipated it. So as we continue to talk, I mean, you know, understanding that there are so many needs now, as the panel has highlighted, that nonprofits did not anticipate. I don't think anybody budgeted for some of this. And Danielle talked about massive spikes. But again, thinking about things like supply chain distribution issues, how do you do a lot of that? Those aren't necessarily things where even on talented and amazing teams like Martha's Table team, doesn't necessarily mean we have a lot of, you know, Six Sigma folks. So another opportunity. So with that, what are some national trends for how public-private partnerships can foster volunteer engagement? And Danielle, could I start with you? And then, you know, Ken, if you have any local perspectives, and Catherine, with your direct experience.
Sure. So, I mean, I think those spikes are a great example. And right now, this moment where we really need to ensure that the civic engagement and the democratic process are working, public and private and nonprofit partnerships and the sector in general conceptually work together to deliver the services that our community needs, right? But so often, as we all know, I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, it doesn't always translate to actually working effectively together. And one of the things that I've seen in my role at Common Impact is when you get not the institutions together, but just the people and the skills that they have and the exposure and the experience on how those puzzle pieces fit together and how the sectors work together at the same table, there's innovation that just naturally happens, and there are connections that naturally happen. And the the approach that we have taken with that is actually removing the sector titles, right? I think we can so often get stuck in this person is a public sector employee, this person is a private sector employee, but really we're all community members and neighbors, and really thinking about what connects us and what can we bring to the table, I think is at the core of any strong partnership. I think particularly right now with public and private partnerships, and I think about the mail-in voting and making sure that the Postal Service, for example, is equipped to deliver those votes. That's something that's going to require a cross-sector approach to ensure that that runs smoothly, right? It requires public infrastructure and investment. It requires private sector support. And so I think there are, in these crisis moments, there's an opportunity to take away those curtains of sector associations and just really think about how our skills and expertise can come together to create change and resilience in the community.
Great. I didn't know if no, and there I am, live and uncut in surround sound. Ken, Catherine, did you have any comments?
Yeah, this isn't necessarily a public private sector example, but one of the things we found is we have companies that are really excited about getting their teams engaged with volunteerism. And one of the things they also are trying to do is they have I won't go into the names, but companies have certain focus areas that they want to concentrate on. So what we've been able to do is for those companies, they pick the type of nonprofit, or in some cases, the nonprofit, and provide the volunteers. And then we help orchestrate it and program manage the project for them. So that's been really successful. And we have a number of companies that have done that over the years. They like it because they get some teamwork generation out of that for their team. The teams get new leadership opportunities many times to work with nonprofits. They get a view outside of corporate America into nonprofits and how they operate. And frankly, the nonprofits many times get new resources because after the projects are over, many times because of the closeness that they've developed from a relationship standpoint, they get tapped into for volunteer efforts and ultimately for board opportunities. So we really think that's a good ecosystem for us to promote and be a part of.
And much like Ken mentioned, Rebuilding Together also offers employee engagement opportunities for employees to give back to their communities. And over the years, we've been able to leverage hundreds of thousands of dollars each year, just purely based on volunteer donated time and labor. So we rely on volunteers heavily and our partnerships with various organizations and foundations.
Well, and I would just add to that, companies right now, Common Impact works with companies every day to build these skilled volunteer programs. And companies are so eager to engage their employees right now because the first half of the year, they really had to pull back on all of their volunteerism efforts. And a lot of that has now moved to engaging more employees more actively in the second half of the year and doing that in a pro bono way. So the supply of volunteers is really high right now. So for the nonprofits that are listening to this, I think a real opportunity to think about pro bono capacity building services.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for that. Everybody who's listening, if you can start dropping your questions in the chat box, we would love to hear that. And with that, something that came out in the one-on-one earlier, and we're interchanging skilled volunteers with pro bono. How do we make that shift and that change in terms of how people really think about volunteering in a different way, and that it is volunteering, and how that could be applied, for example, in the workplace to service hours. No, we didn't go paint something. We redesigned a finance system. So Ken, maybe let me ask you, what can the sector do, to help maybe destigmatize what volunteerism is, and then how do you attract and retain folks who are volunteering in different ways?
Great. Thank you, Kim. So I think back to what Rose started with, I think the first thing we all need to do is just acknowledge the environment we're in. So all those volunteers have jobs or may have financial stress. They might be trying to homeschool their kids, so overall their bandwidth is pretty constrained. And so I think we start with the notion that, hey, folks have other lives and they're doing this pro bono or from a volunteer standpoint. We just need to acknowledge that. I think the key thing from my standpoint and our team's standpoint is to make sure we're connecting people to what they're passionate about. Because I think if people are passionate about something, they are going to give the extra mile. And I'm not talking about just money, I'm talking about time. And if we do a great job of building a relationship with them, meaning start out with virtual events, invite them to talks, get them to know the organization, they're more willing to then give. Now, I think another key thing that I would suggest that nonprofits need to do is make sure they're really clear on what they need. Because when we get into a matching process, you want to make sure that the volunteers' skills, experience, knowledge, and their passion gets unleashed by that opportunity, the pro bono opportunity. And if there's a mismatch, they might do a great job, but they won't be as passionate and they won't repeat. And so I think making sure that there's a good match for the skills needed and what the organization at that point needs, as well as what the person wants to offer in terms of their skills. And then last but not least on that, Kim, would be to say, how have they contributed? Make sure we let them know what they've done to help the organization, recognize them, and thank them.
Yeah, and I think that that's the other thing for colleague nonprofit organizations is it's really volunteer engagement. That's what our team is called. And shout out to our director of volunteer engagement, Brianna Cleveland, who's on the line, and Demario Hill, who's also on the line. It is engagement. It's a two-way street. We've got to get, I think, in part of this destigmatizing and changing the narrative is out of charity, like I do something to help, and therefore, I can feel great and, wonder, versus like, how are we actually trying to solve things together and do work together and lend skills together? And so speaking of working together, Catherine, how do you balance your organization's urgent need for professional development and your volunteers' need for meaningful engagement?
So, Kim, just to piggyback on your comment of working together, we always try to align the task that any volunteer is doing with our mission. So whether it's a board of director member who, as we have acknowledged, is a volunteer. We had a banker on our board who helped me with the PPP loan. Heaven knows I've tapped our HR person enough during this COVID time as well. But for our hammer and nails volunteers, again, we try to connect them with the particular homeowner that they are helping or the community in which they are helping to make it a meaningful experience. And as Rosie mentioned earlier, someone needs to be passionate about it. In my off hours, I am a huge Great Dane Rescue League volunteer. So I'm always going to support Great Dane work because I'm passionate about it. So don't ask me to come serve at a cat facility because I don't connect with that. So it is aligning the work that you do with a volunteer's passion.
Yeah, I think that's so right. And so no cats for Catherine, which ironically, Catherine, okay, no cats. So let me ask the group, what are some of the best tips you'd share with our audience if they're seeking skilled volunteers?
In terms of finding them, Kim?
Yeah. In terms of finding them and then also returning them, retaining them, because again, I think that this engagement piece is really important because if you are a financial expert or a banker, as you said, and then you're just doing your job, basically, what does that engagement look like?
Well, it is funny. Some of our volunteers, if they're an accountant, they want to volunteer at an organization and not deal with numbers, right? They do want to go out and install a grab bar or help, replace a window or something. So it is, as Ken mentioned, it is finding out what the volunteer wants to do and aligning that with what needs to be done.
And I would also say that's exactly right. And expertise is not necessarily what your job title is. A lot of folks have a lot of different skills. And so really figuring out the questions to ask to identify that. Most skilled volunteers are already in your network, or people that you already know, or that the organization already knows, and you just haven't thought of them in that capacity. From board members to more hands-on volunteers to your service constituents, everyone has a skill that is useful, and it's about matching that to the nonprofit need. The dimension that I would add is to just drill down on what Ken said earlier, which is you got to be really specific about what you need and what is a suitable project for a skilled volunteer, because there are some projects, particularly right now, that are capacity building they're just not going to be a day-to-day priority for an executive director who is moving a mile a minute and trying to pivot programming. And so maybe now is not the right time to think about the financial management system at the organization. But it is the right time to think about financial scenario planning or HR and crisis communication. And so thinking about what is a priority project and what is right for external expertise coming in, and really getting clear about that before you go and recruit.
Yeah, I'll just amplify a few things that Danielle and Kim and Catherine already said. So first of all, I think I'd start with get a great board. And get a diverse board, and diversity, not just from a gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation or preference, is skills. And I think the other thing we sometimes make the mistake of is we give the board their setup when we recruit them about, hey, there's a financial give get of X amount. That's absolutely important. But I think as important are other things that the board can do, which is make introductions to companies as well as introductions to volunteers and resources. I think from a volunteer standpoint, what I've seen is you need to find people that are self-starters, that are quick studies, because most nonprofit organizations do not have unlimited bandwidth and people to train people. You need to be able to give someone an idea of what needs to be solved, and you need someone that can just jump in and go after it. And then the other thing, which was also mentioned, is those people are within our reach already. They just are in our network, they're in the board's network, they're in our employees' network, but unless we're really specific in terms of what we're looking for, people won't know what help we need. And so I'll just reinforce that point. And then I think there's almost a progression that we can build into that volunteer nurturing, which is, get them to an event, have them become a donor, get them on a committee. Then ultimately you have a pipeline for your board as well. So I think there's a life cycle that we should be emphasizing to the nonprofits that they can help nurture if they do it really intentionally.
And I'll just add a note to Ken's strong statement about be specific about the ask. Rosie's point, we need to ask people. If we need volunteers, we actually ask them to help us. So just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I think this being specific about what you need is also an important point around the front end of folks who might be able to give us pro bono services, which is to help the nonprofit understand what they actually need and what to actually ask for. And then the points around the board, I think are great. I think a lot of times folks think about boards as money, right? Needed, trust me. But when you start talking about having that accountant, having that banker, having that lawyer, having that program expert, those things are also incredibly, incredibly needed on boards. And I would like to yet again say, I love the Martha's Table board. I really do. I think we have an amazing board. We are getting a ton of questions around virtual. What are we doing in the virtual space? What are the opportunities that exist? How do we engage people in a virtual space, and how do we engage and thank and show our appreciation in this virtual time that doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon? I'm going to just go ahead and, Danielle, looking right at you on my box, so I'm going to start with you.
That sounds great. Pro bono and skills-based was made for virtual engagement. You know, I think there's a power to being in the room with folks, but most pro bono can happen from your home office or your desk. And one of the things that, you know, we have seen is employees and individuals who want to volunteer have very different scenarios right now. They have kids at home, or they have shifted schedules. And so figuring out how to make pro bono accessible to the volunteer is one dimension that has become a tricky game in COVID, though the interest is really there. One of the opportunities that Common Impact has brought online in the context of this current crisis, and also in the context of racial injustice, as we've seen in the headlines, and, you know, hundreds of years old in terms of the issue, but real attention from volunteers and companies right now. I think there's a moment where we can capitalize on that. We've launched a hotline model where it's a very low commitment, dip your toe in the water, single hour for a nonprofit professional and a corporate professional to get on the phone together and to brainstorm a solution. So and most nonprofit executive directors are dealing with problems like this for the first time. And so getting a lay of the land, or understanding what they know and what they don't know, can be as valuable as a more in-depth project, and can also identify what other skills-based opportunities are right for you. And it also, in this context, particularly of engaging companies, we need to think about supporting and protecting the nonprofits in that partnership. We have to equip nonprofits to say no, and those limited bite-sized time commitments can help organizations figure out how they can best engage pro bono.
So for us, as I mentioned, you know, we during mid-project had to switch to virtual. And so one of the things we did is we gathered our project leaders and took them through Zoom training, and, you know, had some feedback sessions with them. And then we also did a midpoint project check-in with our executive directors of those nonprofits we were serving, just to make sure that we were still hitting the mark. So I think getting feedback from the employees, or in this case, the volunteers, and making sure that we kept in really close contact with the nonprofits to make sure that they were still getting their needs met was super important for us. Now, this fall, we will be recruiting another group of volunteers, and this time we will be recruiting them virtually. So, you know, fingers crossed that we are successful in getting our 150 to 175 volunteers for this fall's project, but we so far are really confident we'll be able to do that.
And Kim, here at Rebuilding Together, quite honestly, it's so much of our volunteer work is physical, and it's been challenging for us to engage volunteers in our back end operations, if you will. We have had some volunteers, again, call clients for wellness checks and deliver some home kits. But beyond that, it's been a challenge.
Yeah, and again, I think that's also brings up an interesting point, which is how do you work with these skilled volunteers when they have to start participating in your back end functions? I know that, you know, there are questions around privacy and what isn't appropriate. So what are your thoughts or advice around that?
So most of our data is online, and in terms of private data, public-private data, be it our 990s or financials, budgets, et cetera. But yes, when you start getting into sharing client information with volunteers, we have volunteers sign confidentiality agreements. We also have volunteer liability insurance if any of that AI gets out into the world. So we do background checks on some of our key volunteers as well. So they're just a few tips from Rebuilding Together.
Great. Any other thoughts on that?
Same process for our volunteer process engagement.
Great. So there have been some questions that have come in. Is there a database with different skills from volunteers that can be searched? And Deputy Director Squire is going to put that information, I think, in the chat box. That does exist. And let's go back to that acknowledgement piece. What are ways to really truly acknowledge volunteers, both pre-COVID, but also during COVID? I mean, how do you find out what's the best way to acknowledge the folks who are staying alongside you?
It's such a good question. I think the basics haven't changed. People want to feel like they are part of something bigger than themselves, and they want to feel like they are uniquely contributing. And that's where skills-based is really valuable in just inherent acknowledgement that the skills and the expertise that you brought to the table is different than your neighbors and is different from general volunteerism. And I think just articulating that to volunteers and how that will make an impact on the organization. And the other thing that I've seen, and this again is not something to actually, not something you can touch and feel and give, but to connect what they have done for your organization to the larger issue that you're trying to address. So I'm seeing a lot of corporate employees right now really wanting to contribute to the alleviation of COVID in their particular locale, their town, their community, or to have a part in the racial justice conversation that's happening right now, right? Like those are the two big crises that we are dealing with as a society at the moment, and people want to feel connected to those. So to the extent that you can connect those dots, I don't necessarily think you need something to give them or a t-shirt to make them feel excited about it, though that stuff helps, but really just drawing those lines for them.
Dag nabbit, our t-shirts are arriving tomorrow. Ken?
Well, one of the things that we have found, and I can't speak for every nonprofit that we've supported, but I happen to participate in one of the projects this spring, and the executive director and the board in our debrief at the end of the project went above and beyond, thanking the team. And this is the key, is they said, these are the things that we, in spite of COVID, in spite of the other challenges, we see as requiring, that we are going to require our team implement ASAP. So kind of back to how do they get satisfied and how do they see progress? The results of the recommendations being implemented is one of the greatest rewards that the team can see.
And as Danielle mentioned a second ago, the thanking process has not changed. You still send out thank you cards to the volunteers. We used to acknowledge volunteers, as I'm sure many nonprofits did, at actual events, honoring the volunteers. So now, thankfully, we have some tech savvy folks on our team, because I am not one of those tech savvy persons, but they have figured out, well, they haven't figured out, they know how to make a thank you video. So they have me record, a thank you message on a video, and then they email it out. So it's brilliant and something that I personally could not replicate.
I love it. And I think, again, the engagement piece is so important because people are giving their time. Time has value, right? And we should always thank people who are giving us something of value. I would also just say that I'm always a fan of asking people, you know, what is meaningful to you? How do you want to be acknowledged and recognized? Because to Danielle's point, some people don't want a T-shirt, but some people love that. They like to say, they want to publicly show that they're affiliated. Some people would like a phone call, you know, just picking up the phone and saying, I really appreciate the fact that you came in and lugged 35,000 pounds of potatoes today. It means a lot. But you don't want to call the person who wants the T-shirt and give the T-shirt to the person who wants a phone call. So again, back to respect, conversations, listening, asking, those are in there too. So I know we're starting to wind down. We have a couple of additional questions. During this time when so many organizations are closed, as we've talked about, many of restricted services are contracting. For the volunteers who are out there who want to volunteer and who can't right now, how do you keep them engaged? How do you make sure that they still have opportunities? Catherine, I'll start with you.
That's tough. And again, because so much of Rebuilding Together's work is physical and in person, we do not have volunteers going into the homes making repairs right now. So we are simply continuing to communicate with our volunteers. And when we have virtual ways for them to volunteer, we reach out and ask. But yeah, during these COVID times, we have to keep in mind foremost the safety of our clients and our volunteers.
And I would just add that the benefits and the motivation that individuals get out of volunteering is so rarely about the actual act they're doing, the work that's happening, and it's more about feeling like you're a part of an organization, you're contributing to a cause. So the way that we have approached this is to just say, hey, like, we're scaling back on this dimension, and so we don't need your 2 hours this month, but you're still part of our family and our community, and we need your support, and we're going to keep you in the loop on how the organization is doing or how your partner is doing. And to me, it's just been about constant communication and also pushing back on where we can have volunteerism, and there is still a real significant need, as Catherine was referring to, on for in-person volunteers, and there are safe ways to engage. And a lot of organizations like banks and homeless shelters have lost 80–90% of their volunteer workforce because that volunteer workforce is a vulnerable population, meaning folks that are more vulnerable to COVID, and so could be an opportunity for young people to step up into that sort of work to the extent that it's safe within regional and local guidelines. So I think there's a bunch of different ways to continue to engage volunteers even during this moment.
Yeah, I will just add, for us, as I mentioned a couple of times, we are just shifting what we do from a consulting standpoint to being virtual. And the experience obviously is different because we're used to meeting with our clients face to face and having kickoff meetings and check-ins and all those sorts of things. But again, if the micro projects we did in the spring are any indications, we don't think there's going to be a beat skipped this fall as we kick off.
Also, this is so amazing. I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank all the questions that have come in. There's some specific ones that we will follow up on directly, but I want to give everybody a last comment for all of the folks who are on the phone. What would be your, one thing if everybody logs off today and they take one thing? What is it? Ken, I'm going to start with you.
I think the one thing, kind of harkening back to some of the other discussions, is if you find people that are really passionate about the cause, the mission, if you get them, they are going to share with others. And so that 1 or 2 initial volunteers you get, skilled volunteers, is going to tell others. If they have a lousy experience, they're going to tell that to others as well. But if they have a great experience, they will serve as a pipeline to other skilled volunteers that they know or that are in their network.
My thought is, from an individual point of view, find what you are most passionate about, and then find an organization that can use your skills.
And I would say, just to add to that, think beyond titles and sectors and really connect with people to see what they're excited about, but also what skills they have that might not be in their job description they might leverage for supporting organizations.
You guys are awesome. I love it. So the themes seem to be passion and skills. I love it. That's what we talk about at Martha's Table all the time. We want people who are passionate about the mission and who have the ability to get it done. Catherine, Danielle, Ken, amazing. Director Scales, Deputy Director Squire, thank you guys so much. To the mayor and Serve DC, thank you for having this important conversation, and certainly want to leave everybody with what we started with, which is to act. It's one thing to have the conversations, but we need to learn more, do more, and love more. So let's get to it, folks. Let's do it. Boom. Pow. Alexis.
Thank you. I'm taking that boom pow energy. Again, that was a great conversation, and I think all of the messaging is really consistent throughout both sessions or parts of the sessions. It's really that passion, that intentionality, appreciation, and then really just being transparent. I think we're all in a space where we can be real with one another. We're all going through similar things, and so I think that transparency speaks volumes as we try to engage our volunteers in this climate. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone, for this amazing conversation. We are going to segue now into some upcoming events and initiatives, and not to forget that we too are volunteers. I think Catherine mentioned her passion. We have the capacity to serve, even though we are in professional service-based organizations. And so we have some things that we're wanting everyone to stay connected with Serve DC and to be connected in some of our initiatives. So we'll share some of that now. So up next we have is the Day of Service for September 11th. We're going to do some great initiatives around locally honoring some of our frontline service members as they have helped us over the last few months with COVID and with all of the social injustice. So we're going to do some great initiatives there. So please, stay connected with us so you can learn more about that. We also have DC Startup Week. We're really excited to be a part of that this year to really show the impact of nonprofits and how some local and national businesses have pivoted to support some of the work that we've done here or needed here as it relates to COVID-19. And then we have the Mayor's Maternal and Infant Health Summit that is also taking place this year on a virtual setting on September the 15th. We'd love you all to tune in there. And then we are moving forward with our Mayor Muriel Bowser Spirit of Service Awards, also coming in November. Another way that we are going to be honoring those who are practicing service and exhibiting service and volunteerism within our city. And last but not least, we have our public-private partnership town hall, which we are really excited to get underway coming in January. Again, another display of that collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and our nonprofit partners. So we have a lot coming in the next few months, and we would love for you to stay engaged. All right, how do you stay engaged? Well, we have our CERT members. We talked a lot about that on our first session. That is our Community Emergency Response Team. We would love for you to learn more about that. How do you serve within your communities on a neighbor-to-neighbor, resident-to-resident level? So please learn more on our website, dc.cert@dc.gov. We also have our SNOW team. It's hard to believe, but the summer is coming to an end. And the weather will be shifting soon enough. So we would love for you all to consider joining our snow team. You can learn more about that on our portal, our volunteer and donations portal, and I'll share a little bit more about that and where you can get that information in a moment. But please consider being a snow team hero for our city. And then there are also opportunities to become a commissioner for Serve DC. Please visit our MODA website there that is shared right there. If you are interested in really serving in a board style capacity to help us to curate and navigate service within our city. And as I mentioned before, and I put it there in the chat, this is our volunteer and donations portal. We're really proud to be able to have this portal. We launched it during the height of COVID-19 as we understood, with working with our nonprofit partners, that there were still needs for volunteers, both virtually and in person. We are excited to bring this to you. Some of you mentioned, where's there a database that I can, have information about volunteers? This is certainly that for across the city. And so we would encourage you to share this with your constituents. They can go in, they can sign up, even if they're not accessible right now, they can sign up and get, capture information about their availability, about their interests, and about their skills, so that when an opportunity presents itself, they are ready and they can connect directly with your organizations. So we would really love you all to go into that, look around a little bit, learn more about some of the opportunities that are there now, and encourage your organizations and your constituents to put opportunities and to sign up. Also, we did not want to forget about our 2020 census. We know that part of this, all of this is representation. And so we would want to encourage you to share with your constituents to really get motivated to download the census and to take the census. We know that this is critical data that we need as we are all working collectively to enhance our communities. So please take a moment to fill out our 2020 census. And then last but not least, we are just in the middle. We have two other sessions that we are really excited to have you to join in. The next one is September the 15th, and then we also have another one on September the 29th. We are getting into some really awesome conversations and really things that maybe the nonprofit and philanthropic communities have not thought about in this way before these crises that we are experiencing. So we're going to talk in our next session, which is session 3, about having these diversity dialogues and being intentional about aligning our action to where we stand with equity and inclusion. So we have a powerhouse lineup. We're going to have our Chief Service Officer again, and we're also going to hear from 2 diversity and equity experts in the communications and public relations and training spaces, Ms. Brittany Harris, and then also Ty Wingfield. Additionally, we're going to have a thought-provoking conversation with our Commissioner, Edward Jones, who's the Vice President of Programs for ABFE, and Aisha Alexander Young and Timmy Bennett, who are leading a lot of work on our philanthropic side around racial equity and inclusion in a really intentional and deliberate way. I think this will be something, please mark it on your calendars. The conversations that we're going to have here are needed, they're relevant, they're real, and they're refreshing. So please join us. We look forward to having you. Thank you again for your time today. And then we're going to go to part 4, which is a part 2 of this session 3. So we are really just getting started here. Again, what time to serve, what better time to serve than now? And we are part of our 20th anniversary here at Serve DC. And our motto is, how do I respond to all of this? And that is really through service. How do I respond? I serve. And so we are encouraging you to just promote that message within your audiences of influence. Again, we are encouraging you to stay connected with us. We are on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, our website, and also a huge part of Serve DC is for us to send you our funding alert and newsletter. Please stay connected by signing up so that we can share resources, information, capacity building tools, things like this that we find that we know would be a value add to you. We would love to share it with you. So please sign up for our newsletter and our funding alert. And without further ado, we will hear acknowledgments, final acknowledgments from our Chief Service Officer. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again soon.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dee Dee Squire, as I affectionately call you. This was really a wonderful, and I'm not just saying it, a wonderful conversation and discussion. I am truly appreciative of all of our speakers and presenters who joined us today, just as appreciative of all of you who joined us today. You know, technical difficulties aside, I think we can all agree that the content today, the message and the call to action was extremely important. And I love seeing from a gentleman in the chat, he said he feels motivated. And I stated at the top of this, you know, we want you to leave here feeling inspired to act and understanding how you have the power and you have the skills within to really enact this change within our communities. So I want to also acknowledge and thank Mayor Bowser for giving me and my team this platform to be able to have these kind of conversations, to be able to curate this kind of content to bring back to our community. Because we know that at the end of the day, if we want to build a better DC that's more resilient, that's more equitable, that's more vibrant, that government alone cannot do it, and that we are going to need private sector, philanthropic, nonprofit, as well as residents who are going to be partnering with us. And so I love to say, you know, from the classrooms to the boardroom, from Congress Heights and Ward 8 to the hills of Congress, right? From your house to the White House, we each play a role in making sure that we are enhancing and bettering our communities, and that we are enhancing and bettering not just our lives, but the lives of others. And so your joining us today, your commitment to stay through to the very end today means that you believe this as well. So again, I just want to give a big round of applause to my team who worked really hard. I want to give a big round of applause to our production and content partners, Good Insight, as well as PCB. Let me make sure I get that absolutely correct, because she was feeling terrible about our technology challenges. And I said, listen, don't feel bad. Things like that happen. We're over it. We're moving forward. But to Proactive Business Concepts in Motion and Good Insight, again, who helped us with our production and our content. So please make sure that you take additional action and follow through on what Alexis shared. You know, follow us on social media, go to our portal, and make sure that you join us for our next 2 conversations on Ready for Recovery. Have a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.